time being, it's impossible for me to take my family back to the UK safely. Well, for a start, the only time that I've come back to the UK is...
The horses were prepared. The invited guests had taken their places. King Charles was only moments away from beginning one of the most carefully arranged royal appearances of the season. Then he looked toward the outer gate and froze. Standing beyond the security barrier was Prince Harry. Charles did not ask for an explanation. He did not continue forward. He raised one hand, turned to his equerry, and cancelled the entire horseback event in front of everyone. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles had been expected to lead a private royal horseback procession across the Windsor estate, joined by Queen Camilla, senior equerries, and selected guests. An equerry is a royal aide who assists with official duties, and each one understood why this appearance mattered. The king was meant to project strength, order, and continuity. Instead, one distant figure shattered that message before the first horse moved. Harry had not been listed as a guest, participant, or approved visitor. Yet there he stood near the outer gate, close enough to be recognized but held back by security. He expected acknowledgement. What he received was colder. Attendants removed the mounting block. The king's horse was turned around. Guests began dispersing without explanation. Camilla watched Charles's face harden before anyone understood. His fingers closed around his riding gloves, his shoulders stiffened, and his breathing slowed. She asked whether he felt unwell. He gave no answer. The monarch kept staring toward his younger son as though everything else had disappeared. Charles leaned toward his protection officer and spoke in a final voice. He is not to come through that gate. A protection officer is a security specialist assigned to guard senior royals. But this command carried more than physical meaning. It was not merely about access. It sounded like a father drawing a line his son could not cross. Harry saw the order take effect immediately. Security closed ranks. The distance between them became deliberate. His humiliation deepened as he watched the event collapse because of his presence. Yet he did not leave. A sealed briefing had warned Charles that very morning of a possible unannounced approach. He read one page, folded it closed, and carried it to the stables without telling Camilla. That silence now felt intentional. Harry had not come to watch his father ride. He carried a personal request, tied to a conversation Charles had refused to finish months earlier. Before that request could be understood, the palace had to face the truth. Both men believed the other had already chosen the monarchy over their relationship. To the waiting guests, the scene lasted only minutes. To Charles and Harry, it carried years of anger, grief, and unfinished conversations. One man stood inside the estate, surrounded by guards, protocol, and duty. The other remained beyond the gate, stripped of access, but still bound to the family by blood. Neither moved toward the other. Their stillness said what palace statements never could. The distance between them had become physical. Charles felt the loss more deeply than anyone around him understood. The horseback appearance had never been just another engagement. It represented discipline, continuity, and the traditions he had inherited from Queen Elizabeth. A royal engagement is an official duty carried out on behalf of the monarchy. But this one carried personal meaning. Canceling it meant surrendering a moment tied to his mother, his role, and the image of stability he was desperate to protect. Harry had not returned asking for a title, a position, or a place beside the working royals. He wanted 10 private minutes with his father. No advisors, no lawyers, no senior courtiers, the experienced palace officials who manage royal business and control access. He wanted Charles to hear his voice without another person shaping the message first. Camilla followed the king into the tack room after the horses were led away. She found him beside an unused saddle, staring at the floor as though the decision had taken something from him. The queen consort asked why Harry's presence had shaken him so deeply. Charles did not look up. "Because he knew I would see him," he said. She heard the anger, but she also heard the pain beneath it. Harry remained outside and asked a security officer whether his father had personally refused him entry. The officer avoided his eyes and repeated that the estate was closed. The prince's face tightened. He understood that the cancelled event was not simply a disruption. It was the king's answer. William received the call while traveling to another engagement. The prince listened in silence, then asked, "Did Harry come alone?" When the answer came back yes, he told his driver to turn around and head for Windsor. The future king knew that a lone arrival made the situation more personal, not less dangerous. A palace aide confirmed through the morning contact record that Harry's representative had requested 10 minutes with Charles. The request had been declined before the monarch reached the stables. Harry removed his phone and typed, "I came because this cannot end through other people." No reply appeared. Charles feared more than confrontation. He believed his younger son had returned to reopen a subject capable of shaking William, Camilla, and the future of the crown. That fear had begun months earlier, during a private family meeting that ended with a warning, a slammed door, and a promise Harry had now returned to fulfill. The gate confrontation did not begin with Harry's sudden arrival. It began months earlier inside a private dining room at Clarence House, where Charles had agreed to meet his younger son without cameras or public announcements. What was meant to be a cautious reconciliation became the moment their remaining trust broke apart. One sentence changed the mood. One accusation ended the dinner. And before Harry walked out, he warned his father that silence would eventually force him to return. Charles had arranged the evening after receiving a handwritten letter from Harry. Clarence House is the King's London residence, often used for private meetings away from larger palace ceremonies. Only the monarch, his son, and a distant footman were present. Camilla and William knew the dinner was happening, but neither attended. The king believed fewer people might give the conversation a chance. Harry arrived hoping for something deeper. He wanted to discuss family access, future visits, and contact between Charles and his children. The prince also wanted proof that messages sent through palace offices were reaching his father untouched. Charles entered prepared to set firm boundaries, but he still believed a narrow path toward peace might remain. Then Harry placed a small envelope beside the king's plate. Charles looked at it but did not reach forward. His son asked him to acknowledge that senior palace figures had blocked earlier attempts at direct contact. The monarch refused to open the envelope and pushed it back across the table. That single movement changed everything. Harry accused the family of hiding behind officials because no one wanted to speak honestly. He said every private request became another controlled process. Charles answered that trust had been broken by public disclosures, and that private access could not be demanded after earlier conversations had escaped the palace. Harry then mentioned Queen Elizabeth. He said his grandmother would never have allowed a son to be treated like an outsider. The late queen had been the family's former monarch and emotional center, making her memory especially powerful in any dispute. Charles set down his glass with sudden force. He warned his younger son never to use her name as leverage against him. Harry stood. He left the envelope on the table and said, "Then one day I will come where you cannot pretend I was never there." The prince walked out, and the door closed hard behind him. Charles remained seated, but the threat had landed. Charles opened the envelope only after he was alone. Inside was a written request involving William, security arrangements, and a proposed private family summit, a meeting intended to settle conflict away from the public. The king lifted the paper toward the fireplace, then stopped. He folded it into 4 sections and locked it inside his desk. Now Harry had fulfilled his warning by appearing at the gate, and William was racing toward Windsor, determined to stop the family crisis from staying private any longer. William arrived expecting to contain a security problem. Instead, he found his brother standing alone beside the gate, refusing to leave until someone from the family faced him. No advisors separated them. No ceremonial smiles softened the moment. The future king stepped from his vehicle, dismissed the nearest aide, and walked directly toward Harry. Their first words were not affectionate. They were not careful. They carried the force of every grievance neither brother had been willing to surrender. William reached the entrance after Charles had already withdrawn to the castle. Security officers told the prince that Harry had followed every instruction and had made no attempt to force his way inside. A security officer is a trained guard responsible for protecting senior royals and controlling access to royal property. Even so, the younger brother refused to leave until he received a direct answer from the family. Harry told the officers he did not want a spectacle. He had not come to embarrass the household or challenge the guards. The prince stayed because walking away would allow the palace to treat his journey like another message that had vanished before reaching Charles. William stopped several feet from him. "Why are you here?" Harry held his ground. "Because he will not speak to me unless I stand where he has to see me." The future king glanced back toward the estate. "You have just cancelled his entire day." Harry accused William of controlling access to their father and turning a family wound into a constitutional matter. A constitutional matter is an issue that could affect the monarch's public role, authority, or the stability of the crown. The prince rejected the accusation. He said his brother had repeatedly turned private pain into public pressure, leaving the family unable to trust any conversation. Harry's anger sharpened. He said their mother would have crossed the gate herself, rather than watch two sons remain divided. William's jaw tightened at the mention of Diana. The future king warned him not to use her memory while forcing Charles into a public retreat. Then Harry revealed why he had come. A decision was due to be finalized that afternoon. It concerned his future access to private royal residences, and whether his children could ever visit without formal approval. William did not deny that an order existed. His silence confirmed that Charles planned to make temporary restrictions permanent. Harry placed one hand against the iron gate, but did not push it. "You cannot rebuild a family by locking it," William answered quietly. "You cannot demand trust by arriving without permission." A royal aide approached before either brother could continue. Charles wanted William inside immediately. The king had learned what Harry was trying to stop, and he wanted the future monarch beside him when the final decision was made. The brothers' anger had erupted at the gate, but the real power now waited inside the castle, where Charles was preparing to choose between control and one final path back to his younger son. Inside Windsor, the noise of the cancelled event disappeared behind a closed office door. On Charles's desk lay the order Harry had come to stop. It contained no dramatic language, yet its effect would be devastating. Future visits, family meetings, and access to royal residences would all require written approval. The king picked up his pen, but before signing, he looked at William and asked a question no constitutional advisor could answer for him. Charles understood exactly what the order would do. It would remove the informal access Harry had once held as a member of the family. From that moment forward, every visit would require advance notice, security clearance, and direct approval from the monarch or the Prince of Wales. Security clearance is the formal process used to decide whether someone may enter a protected royal property. On paper, it looked controlled. In reality, it could turn every family meeting into a negotiation. Senior officials supported the restriction because they feared another sudden arrival. They argued that unexpected contact could disrupt schedules, create security risks, and force private emotion into public view. The gate incident had proved how quickly one unresolved family wound could overwhelm an entire royal engagement. Charles sat alone for several minutes before William entered. The monarch held the unsigned page but seemed unable to move beyond the first paragraph. When the prince approached, his father finally spoke. "I can sign this as king. I do not know whether I can live with it as his father." William felt the weight of that question immediately. Supporting strict limits could protect the household, but it might also close the last path toward reconciliation. The future king chose his words carefully, because Charles might hear them not only as a son's advice, but as the judgment of the reign that would follow his own. Camilla entered after being summoned, and looked directly at the document. The Queen Consort reminded Charles that the cancelled ride had humiliated him before guests and staff. She said Harry had crossed a boundary by appearing without permission, and she warned that weakness now could invite another confrontation later. Charles turned toward the aide who had delivered the morning briefing. He asked why Harry's exact request had not appeared in the summary. The official admitted that the message had been shortened before reaching him. One line had been removed, the line saying the matter concerned his children. That changed everything. Charles realized he had never received the full appeal. The discovery did not erase the gate intrusion, but it changed why Harry had come. The king uncapped his pen and held it above the signature line. Then he stopped. Slowly, he placed it across the page. William said nothing. Camilla did not move. Charles ordered Harry taken away from the public gate and escorted to a private estate lodge. He would not be welcomed into the castle, but he would not be expelled from Windsor. The unsigned order remained behind, while the compromise created a deeper crisis. Harry had crossed the outer boundary, yet the one door he wanted most was still closed. The moment Harry's vehicle passed through a side entrance, the palace understood that Charles had changed course. He had not forgiven his son. He had not invited him home, yet he had refused to send him away. That narrow decision divided the royal household instantly. Some saw restraint, others saw weakness. Harry saw something more painful. He was permitted onto the estate, but hidden in a lodge while his father remained behind another locked door. Harry's arrival created immediate confusion. The Horseback event was officially cancelled because of an unexpected scheduling concern, a broad palace phrase used when officials want to explain a change without revealing the real cause. But the guests had already seen the horses being returned. They had also watched Charles withdraw after looking toward the gate. The official excuse could not erase what everyone had witnessed. Harry entered the small estate lodge under strict escort. The building stood away from the castle's main residential rooms, making it private but clearly separate from the family's inner space. He saw 2 untouched cups on a side table and asked whether his father was coming. The officer answered that no meeting had been confirmed. The prince removed his coat, sat down, and covered his face with both hands. Camilla felt the decision as a direct reversal. She had urged the king to hold the boundary, yet Harry had now been brought inside the estate. The Queen Consort closed the door to her private sitting room and told an aide that his arrival had already succeeded. "The entire household is moving around him," she said. Her frustration came from more than pride. She feared that one emotional intrusion could weaken every future rule. William confronted Charles in private. The prince asked whether bringing Harry inside rewarded the pressure they had spent years trying to resist. The monarch answered without raising his voice. Allowing a son to wait is not the same as surrendering to him. The future king heard the firmness, but he also heard doubt. Conflicting instructions spread through the staff. Security officers were first told that Harry must remain outside all residential areas. Minutes later, another command authorized him to stay until evening. The contradiction exposed the struggle at the top. No one knew whether the king was protecting the crown or delaying an emotional decision he feared making. Charles watched the vehicle move toward the lodge from an upper window. After it disappeared, he remained there and quietly told his equerry. He looked more alone than dangerous. The aide said nothing. An attendant later asked whether the cancelled saddle should be stored. Charles touched the polished leather and ordered it left exactly where it was. The abandoned saddle now carried the weight of the day. William made his choice, without telling Camilla or the senior household. He would return to the lodge and face Harry alone, not as the heir defending the monarchy, but as the only brother still able to carry a message between father and son. As evening settled over Windsor, the palace machinery fell silent, leaving 2 brothers with no officials, no prepared statements, and no excuse to avoid the truth. When William entered the lodge, Harry was standing beside the window with his back to the door. There were no security officers inside. no aides taking notes, and no advisors controlling the language. For the first time that day, the confrontation was entirely private. William did not begin with an accusation. He placed Harry's unopened message on the table and said their father had finally read every word. What followed was not reconciliation, but it was the first honest conversation either brother had allowed in years. William had dismissed his protection officer at the entrance and walked in alone. A protection officer is a trained security specialist assigned to guard senior royals, but leaving him outside mattered. The prince was removing the very barrier Harry had spent years blaming for their distance. This conversation would not belong to the palace. It would belong to two brothers. Harry turned toward him and spoke carefully. He was not asking for restored status, unrestricted access, or a return to royal duties. The prince wanted one assurance, that his children would not inherit the anger of the adults, and would still be allowed private contact with their grandfather under agreed conditions. For him, this was no longer about rank. It was about whether the next generation would be punished for wounds they had not created. William placed the complete request on the table. The future king explained that Charles had discovered parts of Harry's message had been removed before reaching him. The monarch remained furious about the gate appearance, but he was disturbed that he had never received his son's full words. Harry admitted the truth. Standing at the gate had been deliberate. He knew it would alarm the household, but he believed another letter would disappear through layers of staff and controlled summaries. His voice weakened. I did not know how else to make him look at me. William did not soften the cost. He told his brother that the tactic had frightened Charles, embarrassed the household, and forced the king to abandon an event tied closely to duty and memory. Harry listened without interrupting. For the first time that day, he seemed to understand that his desperation had caused real pain. Then William offered one condition. Charles would meet Harry for 15 minutes if the conversation remained private and was never used as public leverage. The Prince of Wales made clear that this was not negotiation. It was the only path left. Harry nodded immediately. He asked for no extra time, no witnesses, and no written promise. Instead, he handed William his phone and asked him to keep it during the meeting. The gesture said more than an apology ever could. He was prepared to enter as a son, not as a public figure. William reached the door, but Harry stopped him with a quiet thank you. The future king looked back and said, "Do not make me regret bringing you to him." There was no embrace. Yet the anger between them softened into exhausted recognition. Charles was waiting in the small office beside the stables. The gate had separated father and son before the world, but the next meeting would happen beside the abandoned saddle, where neither rank nor distance could protect them from the truth. Before Charles and Harry could meet privately, the outside world had already seized the moment. One image dominated television screens and newspaper websites, the king turning away from his prepared horse, while Harry stood as a distant figure beyond the Windsor Gate. It contained no shouting, no physical confrontation, and no official explanation. Yet to the public, it captured the entire royal crisis in a single frame, a father retreating as his son remained outside. The royal household issued a brief statement confirming that the horseback appearance had been cancelled, but it never mentioned Harry. A royal household statement is an official message released on behalf of the monarch and senior family members, yet this one explained almost nothing. The silence around the prince's name only made the encounter feel more serious. Broadcasters quickly divided the story into two opposing versions. Some called Harry's arrival an unacceptable disruption of the king's duties. Others described it as proof that the family could no longer speak without guards, gates, and strict ceremony standing between them. Charles was presented as both a wounded father and a monarch under pressure. Harry was seen as either desperate or reckless. By late afternoon, a crowd had gathered near the public approach to Windsor Castle. Some held small Union flags, the national flag of the United Kingdom, while others simply stared toward the sealed entrance. When a black vehicle passed inside, the voices stopped. No one knew whether it carried Harry, Charles, or another member of the household. One evening newspaper turned the moment into a national symbol. Its front page showed Charles beside the riderless horse and Harry behind the iron gate. Across the image ran the words, "A king turns back, a son stands outside." Charles saw the page inside the stable office. An aide placed it before him without speaking. The king studied the photograph, folded the paper inward until Harry disappeared, then slowly opened it again. The image wounded him because it reduced years of grief to one simple truth. His son was outside, and he had walked away. Harry heard the distant crowd from the lodge. The prince realized that the private appeal he had wanted had already become public theater before he had spoken a single word to his father. Every possible outcome now carried a cost. Advisors urged Charles to resume a shortened version of the Horseback event and restore the appearance of control. The monarch refused. Pretending nothing had happened, he said, would turn a family crisis into performance. Harry was then escorted toward the stable office, while cameras remained fixed on the gates. Charles waited inside with the unsigned restriction order between them. The world had already formed its judgment from a photograph. The final meaning of the day would now depend on whether the king signed the order or finally spoke to the son standing across from him. Charles did not rise when Harry entered the stable office. The unsigned restriction order rested on the desk beside the riding gloves the king had removed after canceling the event. For several seconds, father and son simply looked at one another. There was no embrace, no dramatic apology, and no instant healing. But when Charles pushed the order away instead of signing it, Harry understood that the gate had not yet become a permanent wall between them. Harry entered without a phone, advisor, or security officer. The prince accepted that the conversation would last only 15 minutes and remain private. A restriction order is a formal instruction limiting access to royal property, and the unsigned page between them could have turned temporary distance into permanent separation. Charles made the terms clear. His son accepted them without argument. Charles addressed the damage first. The monarch told Harry that arriving without permission had forced him to cancel an important event and had placed staff, guests, and security officers in an impossible position. The prince apologized directly. He did not blame the household, the guards, or the advisors who had blocked earlier messages. Harry then explained the gate. He said every quieter attempt had failed, and he feared another permanent order would cut his children off from any real relationship with their grandfather. The prince admitted the gesture had been reckless. "I did not come to win," he said. "I came because I thought I was running out of time." Charles answered as a father, not only as king. He said trust had been badly damaged and could not be repaired in one meeting. Yet the monarch also admitted that allowing officials to shorten Harry's message had deepened the estrangement and hidden the true reason for his return. Then Charles made the decision. The king lifted the document, tore it once through the signature line, and placed both halves inside a drawer. He would not grant Harry unrestricted access, but he would not approve permanent exile either. Charles created a private arrangement. Harry could request future meetings through one designated aide, meaning a single trusted official would carry personal messages directly to the monarch. His children could attend planned family visits as long as security rules and confidentiality were respected. William entered only after the meeting ended. The prince listened as Charles told both sons that neither would use him against the other. Harry accepted responsibility for the gate confrontation. The future king agreed that personal messages would never again be filtered without their father's knowledge. Charles later instructed the stable staff to prepare the cancelled Horseback event for another date. He did not ride that evening. The day could not be erased, but tradition would continue without denying the wound. The cancellation was not Harry's victory, Charles's defeat, or William's surrender. It proved that discipline without communication becomes isolation. The king protected the crown, but he refused to make its boundaries a permanent prison. Harry left through the same gate where he had stood that morning. This time, it opened before him not as a return to royal life, but as proof that a damaged family had chosen difficult peace over final rejection. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.